community, and he can't really tell you what he did. Well, he could, but you wouldn't be able to leave this room. And Fred, when President Trump was elected, Fred was one of the most outspoken people in favor of Trump's policies, not only before he was elected, but after he was elected. And so President Trump asked Fred to come to the White House, to the National Security Council, where there were problems from the very beginning and issues about the staff. And Fred was brought in a very critical role as the Chief of Staff and Executive Secretary of the National Security Council, which he did with great dignity and sophistication and purpose, and kept totally under the rug. But he did it all and didn't get the praise he deserved, but he's back out of the White House now, free again, and Fred is now President and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. He is also, you probably recognize him because he's frequently in the media talking about a lot of issues, intelligence, Asia, China, but he's really one of the foremost, I think, one of the foremost national security experts and thoughtful guys in the country. And then finally, bringing up the diplomatic corps is a man who's had decades of experience, Ambassador Cho. He's the former ambassador, Korean ambassador to Australia and to Ireland. He had a 38-year tenure in government, and he specialized in national security, especially pertaining to North Korea's nuclear threats and U.S.-Korean relations. So we have the young scholar who's part of the conservative movement. We have the American expert who knows President Trump. So yeah, has he called you lately? He's called me all the time. Is he calling you too?
I can't say.
I know you can't tell me that either. And we have someone who spent decades in the service of his country and Korea, taking Korea from the earliest days when I was a graduate student in Seoul in the early 1970s, and you've helped a nation that in 30 and 40 years has become one of the most sophisticated modern countries in the world, I think in large part thanks to the Korean people. And then you get me as the question asker. Okay, so what's happening in South Korea? I just want to be a little preface of this by saying that when Trump was elected, the first thing that President Obama said to him during the transition was, your biggest problem is going to be North Korea. Nobody knows. If North Korea is your problem, we don't know. Nobody has any good answers. And so Trump had said to me, and when we talked about it, I said, look, North Korea could test nuclear weapons, could test long-range missiles, and nothing's worked. We've tried diplomacy, we've tried carrots and sticks, we threaten them, we give them goodies, but nothing's really worked. They've just clicked along further and further in the development of their nuclear program. And Trump said, we're committed to not allow nuclear weapons, to North Korea to have its hands on nuclear weapons capable of hitting the United States. So the first meeting that I called in the White House Situation Room as Deputy National Security Advisor was to bring all of the agencies of government around, and you're familiar, Fred, because you've chaired a lot of those meetings. And I went around to the Treasury Department, the State Department, the Justice Department, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, and I went around and I said, what do you think what's our Korea policy? What should it be? And it was just same old, same old. And I said, look, none of this stuff has worked for 20 years. Why do you think it's going to work now? President Obama left office and his Korea policy was basically kick the can down the road. It was strategic patience. Well, strategic patience means I don't know what else to do, so I think I'm just going to be patient. So I asked the people around the room, go back to your home agencies, come back to the White House Situation Room in about a week and a half, and I want to hear different ideas. I want to hear you go look under every rock in your intelligence community. Go ask everybody, think outside the box, think way outside the box. At one end, I want you to think maybe what would happen if we recognized North Korea as a nuclear weapons state in the international community of nations? What happens on the other end if we have military action against North Korea? What covert operations could we pull off? What intelligence options do we have? What treasury and economic and financial options we have? Anyway, the long and short of it is that we realized there was no silver bullet, nothing was really going to work, but we were able to take a few threads of each of those areas and put them together in what's called the maximum pressure campaign, where the United States is slowly turning up the dial on carrots and on sticks in North Korea. So that was my experience when I left it, but I want to ask you, I want to start, Daniel, with you, and tell tell the audience, what's happening in South Korea today?
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the organizations for inviting me. Actually, if you look in the brochure, you'll find a different name. It's Dr. Taro, who unfortunately couldn't make it. She was a bit ill, so I have to fill a very big shoes. I feel like a student with professors. But about Korea, about what's happening in Korea right now, and I'm talking about South Korea, not North Korea, and you'll be surprised to hear that freedom is in peril. I was thinking of how I can relate to you what's happening, and I think the best way to describe what's happening in Korea is to imagine that Bernie Sanders wins in November, and just imagine what will happen in the next 4 or 5 years after he wins, after he becomes the president of the United States. And that's happening in Korea right now. In fact, just play with me with another imagination. Imagine that President Trump wasn't acquitted at the Senate last month. And for some reason, somehow, you have fast-forwarded the election process and Bernie Sanders is elected. That's actually what happened in 2016. President Park Geun-hye, the former conservative president, was framed with some wrongdoing, and there was this big protest. All the liberal media, mass media participated. Even China has helped in the demonstrations. There are evidences that tens of thousands of Chinese students have participated in the candlelight demonstration, which was praised by the New York Times as the most democratic event in Asia in some time. But it wasn't a democratic movement. It was a false narrative that was portrayed against the president. And she was impeached. She wasn't acquitted. She came down, and there was an election, a very fast-forwarded election, and a socialist has taken over. I think most conservatives in Korea will agree that the current President Moon Jae-in is, if not a communist, definitely a socialist-leaning Asian president right now. So that's what's happening. And after he was elected president, the purges started. Four former heads of intelligence under the President Park Geun-hye was imprisoned, and they are still in imprisonment. President Park Geun-hye, of course, was imprisoned and was sentenced to 27 or so years. And some journalists who spoke out against President Moon Jae-in was jailed as well. Some of them are released, some of them are still in jail. And in total, last time I counted, there were about 130 individuals, mostly conservative journalists and activists who were jailed by the current Moon Jae-in government. So this is a brief overview of what's happening in South Korea. You may not believe me, but because you probably have never heard of this, but you have to realize that most of the major newspapers that produce English articles that you can read are liberal. They are very left-leaning liberal newspapers. So probably this is the first time you're hearing about this, but I can tell you that many of the conservatives here will attest to what's happening in Korea. Yes.
Let me turn to the ambassador, and I'm going to get back to you, Fred, because I want you to talk about what the Trump administration, how we're seeing this new changing relationship since he took office. But Mr. Ambassador, you were active in diplomacy during the period of South Korea's ascent. The United States, we had an active policy after the Korean War to say to the South, we will subsidize your economic development. We will be the big brother and provide you with a security guarantee with our U.S.-South Korea treaty. And we want you to develop into a trading partner. We want you to be an open and liberal society. And that's exactly what Korea has done. In fact, so successfully that Korea's economy was thriving, the democracy in Korea was just on the ascent, but something seems to have changed. Now, we still think of Korea as our best friend, and we think of them as a country that is a great democracy, a great trading partner with the United States. But it seems that Korea itself, South Korea, is under a certain amount of tension, and particularly with regard to its relationship not just with the United States, but with North Korea. Could you elaborate on that and how you think things have changed and where we are today from your perspective?
Okay. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I stepped down from my position in government in 2017, and before that time I was actually Deputy National Security Advisor in Seoul. So had I stayed on in that position, I could have worked with Katie very closely actually. So finally we met, and yes.
Everybody needs a CPAC one day. So carry on.
Yes, I belong to the generation of Korean people who actually witnessed the transformation of my country from one of the poorest, really depending upon U.S. assistance for managing the affairs of the state in the 1950s, to a very energetic trading nation, and then on to the member of the G20 in 2008, and also coupled with my country's rather dramatic turnaround into one of these economic force to be reckoned with in the world. Korea has democratized, so democracy has really blossomed, and now we can say anything in the streets of Korea. You can be subject to some criticism from the passers-by lookers on, but nonetheless, you have the freedom of speech in my country, and we are a very different country, very open, cosmopolitan, democratic nation. And we achieved that, of course, through the efforts, toils, blood, and tears of the Korean people. Something we all must actually acknowledge and cheer. At the same time, Korea's achievement was not Korea's achievement alone, because it only was possible because we were supported by the United States, and our defense was helped by the United States, and the US encouraged Korea to become a very vibrant, open, democratic nation, something we finally achieved in the 1990s. Now, something else happened too. With the full exercise of the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and all political activities, naturally under a democratic system, voices who are rather close to the views of North Korea actually happened too. The views, political views, who do not really support the ROK's alliance with the United States appeared. And we have a big divide in Korea at the moment. And we have a big ongoing political discussions or defining discussions that can really determine the future of the Korean Peninsula and the Republic of Korea. Having said that, I'd like to make one thing very, very clear to you. That is, regardless of the political persuasion one belongs to in my country, a vast majority, meaning 92% to be exact, of the Korean population, Korean people believe that it is a good thing that we have this alliance relationship with the United States. Different question. In 20 years' time, would you rather see Korea aligned with the United States or aligned with China? That's another question. And then over 85% say that, sure, after 20 years, we should be aligned with the United States. only about, I think, 13% say that perhaps we should better align with China. So what I'm saying is that although we have differences domestically about economic policies, internal policies, what kind of policy we should pursue, or whether we should applaud the Korean government's efforts to stem the flow of coronavirus, so we should criticize the Korean government for not doing their job. We have differences, but vast majority of the Korean people believe that US is Korea's friend, and we should be aligned with the United States. So I'd like to make this point very, very clear to you today.
I think that's a really important point to make, is that the US, well, first of all, the United States has a security treaty with Korea. In other words, if Korea is attacked by China, whoever, the United States has a treaty commitment to come to Korea's aid. But when Fred Fleiss went to the White House with President Trump, it's a period where we're rethinking a lot of American foreign policy. So how do you see, because you've seen President Trump in action very recently, how do you think that he looks and the American government looks at the relationship, not only between the United States and Korea, but Korea, North Korea, South Korea, and potentially what happens with the Korean-China relationship?
Well, it's an honor to be on this panel. Thank you all for coming. And KT, it's great to be on a panel with a fellow former Trump administration NSC staffer. You got to read KT's book about how the deep state drove her out. Unrelated subject, but it's a fabulous book. She's really a hero who has fought to keep her nation safe and to help President Trump succeed. I did meet with the president in August to talk about North Korea in the Oval Office. And while we were there, he motioned to his secretary to bring in the letters. And the secretary brought in a manila envelope full of the letters that he and Kim Jong-un have exchanged. The Kim letters were typed in Korean with English translations. The Trump letters were written in President Trump's handwriting with his traditional giant signature at the bottom, if you've ever seen it. And it looked like two letters exchanged between friends, two friendly leaders, and he was very proud of them. He's proud of this personal diplomacy that has thrown out the diplomatic rule book and years of North Korea taking advantage of US diplomacy to try to create a chance for peace. Now, if you listen to the presidential candidates right now, the Democrats, they're saying that President North Korea policy has failed and they would do better in dealing with North Korea. Yeah, I'd like to see that. We've seen decades of US administrations, Republicans and Democrats, trying to negotiate with the North Koreans. They manipulate what is taking place. They behave themselves for a while, then they continue their belligerent behavior until we pay them off again. Now, President Trump knows that, and that was the maximum pressure strategy he used in 2017. That was President Trump going to the General Assembly Hall and threatening to totally destroy North Korea if it threatened the United States and its allies. That sent a message that scared the hell out of Kim Jong-un, and it brought Kim Jong-un to agree to meet with the president. And we've offered North Korea a better future with an unorthodox video, which we showed Kim in Singapore what North Korea would look like if it agreed to a peaceful solution of its differences with South Korea and the United States. Now, we haven't been able to get these talks moving. We know there were talks in Vietnam. They did move for a variety of reasons, not just that Kim wanted to manipulate the talks, and maybe KT knows more about this, but frankly, I think there are people at the State Department who are not on board with President Trump's policies and led the North Korean government to believe that President Trump would be more flexible than he actually was. There's a chance for peace. Kim has actually used the word denuclearize. That was a major step forward. We don't know what that means to the North Koreans. We don't know whether we will get that agreement. But I'm so frustrated when I see intelligence officials and former officials saying, this strategy has failed or will fail. This strategy has not played out yet. We're still working with North Korea to try to find a way forward. So the president thinks he's taken a different approach. He has lowered tensions on the Korean Peninsula. He's decreased the chances of a war by miscalculation. We have a long way to go. There's a lot of worrisome signs. We see Kim trying to build relationships with China and Russia, maybe to get leverage with the United States. Briefly were working level talks in September, but KT, I think that's because the North Koreans saw John Bolton's exit and thought that our policy would have changed. But you and I know Bolton wasn't making a North Korea policy.
There's only one guy who makes American foreign policy.
That's exactly.
He's the guy that sits behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office, drinking Diet Cokes incessantly all day long. And when he gets bored, he picks up the phone and says, hey, I want to talk to the president of South Korea, or hey, I want to talk to Xi Jinping in China. He is the only guy who's making the decisions.
So I think that's where we are. The president thinks he has achieved something. Now, concerning South Korea, we are urging the Moon government, please stop making concessions before Kim comes along with what we're trying to negotiate. Please stop moving so far. The Moon government has helped the negotiations with the North, but they are too eager for a deal. They're where the US government usually is. We want a deal more than the rogue state does. That's how we got the terrible nuclear deal with Iran. We wanted that deal so badly, John Kerry gave them everything but the store to get that terrible deal. And the North Koreans watch this. The Iranians watch what we're doing in North Korea. President Trump wants a deal, but he showed at the Vietnam summit. He wants a good deal, and that's the way this is going to play out.
Can I go back to Daniel? I want to ask you, so what is the current situation between the South Korean government, which as you point out is a socialist government, and their ambitions for North Korea? Fred has just implied that really the United States wants a tougher line against North Korea than South Korean government does.
Definitely. The more the United States takes a tougher line on North Korea, it's beneficial for the Moon government because it generates the needed anti-American sentiments, and they can say that it is the United States that's dividing us. It is the United States that's preventing us from achieving peace on the Korean Peninsula. So it helps the Moon government to push his agenda. And his agenda is not very different from the agenda of Kim Jong-un, which is to unify the country, but not under a liberal democracy, but under socialism. It's more than socialism, it's more like a totalitarian, very dark state, more like a theocracy. But obviously, Moon Jae-in is not going to outwardly say that. He is going to achieve this unification, so-called unification, in steps. And the first step is to enter a process that's called the confederational unification, which basically means that it's going to be a one state, a two state, or but two countries united, but with different heads of states, and maybe in steps. We're going to take step-by-step approach to unify the country as a whole, but that will only make it a socialist country because Moon Jae-in, the North Korean state, it has only one party, whereas the South Korean, it's a multi-party system. So it's never going to play out.
So what you're saying, I mean, I think most Americans look at South Korea, and any of us, anybody been to South Korea? Okay, yeah, a lot of people. Okay, so South Korea we think of as prosperous and advanced, and now you have a free press and free elections. And then we think of North Korea as this like slave labor camp, where the head of South Korea, Kim Jong-un, if he doesn't like his political opponents, he puts them into cages with dogs and they get eaten. So we think, what kind of a unification, is a unification possible? So I want to ask the diplomat in the room, the guy who's had to negotiate deals. Do you think that it would be possible for North and South Korea to unite in the sense of East and West Germany is united? Could North and South Korea, two completely different systems and objectives, what do you see that future going to?
Well, the West Germany, East Germany only was unified when East German people elected different governments in East Germany. And they negotiated and they were unified through a peaceful means. So when you apply that parallel to the Korean Peninsula, it is hardly likely for two Koreas, which have such different, starkly different worldviews and systems and ideologies, to negotiate a formula for unification. I don't think it's likely at all. So unification formula is there. so that the two Koreas can become more similar to the side of freedom and the market economy. And then two Koreas will be ready to negotiate unification. Before that happens, the current North Korean government and South Korea can negotiate the unification formula. I don't think it's possible at all. So we have to be very realistic. And about North Korean, if you allow me, nuclear issue, I can say just two things. Three things. One, international community, United States, South Korea tried to convince North Korea to give up nuclear weapons through negotiations for the last 3 decades. And all attempts have failed. Not because international community had been at fault, but because North Korea would not give up nuclear weapons no matter what. So, before I see the evidence that this time North Korea is really serious about giving up nuclear weapons, even with hefty demands on us, before I see that evidence, I'll have to assume, as a policymaker in foreign policy and national security areas, I have to assume that North Korea would not give up nuclear weapons. So that's still my assumption. Secondly, so we have to prepare not only for the success of negotiations, but also for the failure of the negotiation, realistically speaking. And how do we prepare for that? Two things. One, never ease sanctions on North Korea. Never ease economic sanctions on North Korea. That's the only reason that Kim Jong-un might consider negotiating about nuclear weapons. I should remind you that actually Kim Jong-un from 2011 consistently said he would even, not giving up, but he would even refuse negotiations about nuclear weapons with anybody. And he changed his policies only because, I believe, the very harsh and strong, robust international sanctions placed on North Korea. So never slacken sanctions before any tangible evidence that something is going right. And finally, never undermine the combined defense posture between US and ROK before North Korea gives up nuclear weapons. Never destroy this very robust framework of defense, combined defense between the United States and ROK, as something that two countries took years to build, because North Korea might say that they might give up nuclear weapons. So just don't do that. So defense, strong defense, hold on to the sanctions, and never rush into hasty assumptions on negotiation with North Korea. That's my advice.
Let's shift a little bit and ask about the elephant in the room, which is China. We in America, we don't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. We're very happy to have a South Korea as a strong American ally. If there is ever unification, we would hope it's on South Korea's terms, not North Korea's terms. But it seems that China is, not only from the US perspective, but from the Korean perspective. Talk us through all of that. What does China look at that relationship and say? What does China look at our relationship with the Koreans and say? And what do you think the prospects are as we are now entering probably a pretty significant period of Chinese instability, perhaps, because of Hong Kong, the coronavirus, their economy is slowing down, they're no longer the bright boy on the world stage. So talk to me about the China perspective in Asia. And what do they want out of it? What do they want out of Korea? And what do they want out of us?
China likes North Korea being used as a proxy and as a state that will cause trouble for the United States in the region. But when North Korea tests underground nuclear devices with a yield of 250 kilotons or more, which it probably tested in September of 2017, North Korea has crossed a line. And I think China realizes that these weapons it was willing to tolerate, as long as it was an annoyance to the United States and South Korea, have become a real problem of regional security. These are not weapons to be used as deterrents. These are weapons to drive the United States from the Asia Pacific and to unify the Korean Peninsula on North Korea's terms. North Korea does not need a missile that can hit the east coast of the United States to defend its sovereignty. These are offensive weapons, and it's one reason why President Trump has been so tough with North Korea, and it's why the president made progress in 2017 and 2018 to get China to finally start complying with UN sanctions on the North, and this helped bring Kim to the negotiating table. Another brilliant thing the president did is that when he met with Kim in Singapore and Vietnam, China wasn't there. This was great. It prevented China an opportunity to manipulate the talks to its advantage, to play deal maker. We don't want to have six-party talks again that China runs, talks in Beijing, where China will get an agreement that may lower tensions, but mostly promotes China's interests. The president is smart, and I'm sure you played a role in this, KT, to say, if we have talks with North Korea, we're not going to let China run them, they're not going to be at the table. All the Democratic presidential candidates, they're saying this is a solution. It is not. Now, look, we want China to help us, and we've been pressing the Chinese government to press North Korea to live up to its obligations, to denuclearize, because if there are more powerful underground nuclear tests that could be H-bombs, they're going to breach the